As a quick recap, in your book from last week, we talked about filling in those pages that were about you, right? About you. And many of those things are very straightforward. If you have a website, if you have an ORCID ID, if you don't have an ORCID ID, there was information in one of the Monday messages on how to get one. And Scopus, if you're an author, as well as research systems that you think that you'll use. Many of the research systems are based on what sponsors you feel are your primary sponsors. Maybe that's NSF or Institute of Education Sciences. And then where you work, your indirect cost agreements. What if you're at a place that doesn't have an indirect cost agreement? In that case, it would be 10%, which is the de minimis, according to uniform guidance. And sponsor research administrator, if you don't have one, then you may be partnering with an organization that has one. And who is allowed to submit your proposal? So those were the first pages. And then you had the checklist for your FOA. Of course, your alphabet soup. We're going to do a lot of acronyms today. Your RFA is a funding opportunity announcement, or your RFA, request for applications. They all mean pretty much the same thing, but they're different in the type of information they're going to provide. So, for example, an RFA, we're recapping, is an explicit grant to do one thing, whereas a BAA is going to be a broad announcement, which will have multiple tracks, different types of things that you're going to want to do, or one of the tracks that you're going to follow. So BAAs are going to be much more, many more opportunities over many more deadlines for multiple years. BAAs are often for 5 to 10 years, announcing funding opportunities across a large portfolio of needs. And in week 1, we looked at research purpose. If you haven't yet, there is a really fun video to watch in the resources. Simon sent it on purpose. Today, we're going to be talking about defining need and significance, week 2. And the presentations are recorded and posted online. David, I'm all done my recap.
Great. That kind of welcomes everybody then to the second week. And Sadie's already told you what it is that she's going to discuss. A little bit of housekeeping. If you have questions, of course, you feel free to write to us at sar-research@usf.edu, or you can write to me directly at dcroxford@usf.edu. Both those emails are in the chat already. Sandy will stop at various points throughout her presentation, and she encourages engagement. So if you have questions, by all means, raise your hand. We'd like to have as many people engage and participate as possible. If you would rather, you can type your question into the chat and add a stopping point, then I will relay that question to Sandy. Other than that, I think we're good to go, and let me get on with week 2.
Okay. And thank you in advance for any technical difficulties we might have. I'm going to do my very best to plow forward. We're going to go ahead and start with death by PowerPoint. We're going to do a presentation slide of, I think, about 70 slides. And after that, we're going to do open discussion. Share screen. And the slides are posted if you would like to follow along. And I hope that they're posted in a way that allows you to look at notes. I do quite a bit of putting things in notes of the slides so that you can see the context as well as see links to further information. If you can't get to the notes, please let me know. I'm happy to send the slides to you or upload them just in PowerPoint rather than PDF. Here's our team. You know us, me and David and Hawa. Research means that you don't know, but you're willing to find out. And that is a long journey, and I hope that you continue to stay the course, because this is how we advance knowledge. And through these insights, we can drive innovation, improve the life of our community, and create change. So understanding the rules that govern grantsmanship, those are the compliance from uniform guidance at federal level to a sponsor's level, from National Science Foundation, what their guidelines are, National Institutes of Health, to the institution where you work. So when an auditor comes in to audit your books, and they will, they're going to want to make sure that you're following the rules that align with those three categories. You're following the federal rules, you're following the sponsor's rules, and you're following the rules of your organization. An example is if you are buying equipment on your grant and your equipment is $4,900, not quite the federal rule. The federal rule says equipment is anything $5,000 and above. But your home institution may say equipment is anything $3,000 and above. So your institution may treat it as equipment, whereas your sponsor doesn't, because it doesn't meet that $5,000 threshold. How do you know if this is a need? What are your outcomes? How do you define those? And oftentimes that is, do you have a metric around measuring that in time? How do you measure it in people? Or are you measuring over a period, a snapshot? So ethnographers, for example, will look at studies on a long-term view. They'll be the gorillas in the mist type of scientists or researchers that go and they look at a situation to get human truth. How does that impact, right? And they'll look at 10 or 20 years of data to really get into the understanding of what they're looking at, that problem. Whereas some researchers will take a more a smaller snapshot, such as a clinical study. In a clinical study, you may say, we're going to have 50 people in our study, and we're going to make sure that the demographics match so that this 50 person study will represent 5 million people, right? So when you're thinking about that and you're developing your needs statement in your grant, you want to be able to know the literature, measure in the ways that your field measures. So, and speak to the prevalence of the problem, you know, have those data, whether that's statistical data or the literature says, so that you can define what you're going to work on, how your project maps to that need, and what the outcomes might be. When you're communicating significance, can people see that okay? Okay, when you're communicating significance, you want to make sure that you're speaking to your field. So in an increasingly interdisciplinary field, right? So you're thinking about how it benefits anthropology or how it benefits medicine, because that's where I'm in, right? But how does my study also benefit society? How does it also benefit the people in this coming in this workforce or the future students coming into the field, and expanding beyond that, the significance to other fields, right? The ethos of your project. Here we're going to talk about the Socratic, the 3 pillars of Socratic argument: ethos, pathos, logos. And in the ethos, you're going to think about how you persuade others, how you get them to understand your problem. And as this relates to grant writing, that means that you're not going to write in such a way that you're writing over an audience's head. You want to get you want them to get understanding what you're saying, and you don't want to talk under. When George Carlin or Eddie Murphy, when these great comedians are writing comedy, it's a very hard balance to find, because you want to write comedy in such a way that you're telling your audience, you know, they're smart, right? I'm going to tell you about this problem because we're all smart people. We can come up to solutions together. But you don't want to tell them, I'm going to explain this to you like your children, because I know that it's a really complex thing, because then you're talking down to your audience. For peer reviewers, the first thing you want to do is you want to know who your peer reviewers are, because you want to speak to them. And in peer reviewers at a federal level, you're looking at the people at the top of your field that are being invited. So they know this area of research well. They're the top of your field. So when you're writing to NIH or NSF, you want to write like you're writing for the journal that is the top of your field. That is the rhetoric that you want to use. But you also want to be sure that you're clear so that you're communicating. And we want to be compelling. When we write these need statements, when we're talking about the significance of our work, we want to be persuasive and compelling. We want to give that sense of urgency. We want to show that real need that needs to happen now, because you want them to buy in. Because we don't want our peer reviewers to just read it and understand it. We want them to read it, understand it, and agree that this is something that we need to do. We need to pursue this research. This project needs to happen, these ideas. And that's essentially what we want to make sure that we get across in our grant. Funders don't fund people, they fund ideas. So you want to demonstrate the appeal of your idea. And logos speaks to process. So let's say, for instance, I have this really great idea. Sandy's got a great idea. We're going to create a virtual sponsored research administrator so that we can offset some of the most frequently asked questions. We can put all this knowledge into an avatar, right? Wow, an avatar that will come up on your computer and say, here's the template that you're looking for to help you do this part of your grant. And we've pre-populated with budget information. Or, you know what, I'm going to go ahead and review this proposal as a virtual sponsor research administrator, make sure you're followed all the rules. And any place where it doesn't seem like you're following the rules, I will highlight it for you. A virtual assistant. Wouldn't that be wonderful? Now, if I submitted this grant to the National Science Foundation, you have an AI learning virtual assistant that has an avatar that's created online. Sandy, what skills do you have that lends to creating an AI virtual assistant with a type of machine learning? None. I'm not an engineer. So am I the right person to that project? Maybe. It is my idea. I own that idea. However, I couldn't do it by myself. So when you're thinking about the logos of your project, you want to think about all the aspects of your project. Do you have the expertise to do it? How would it get done? Can you describe the methodology in a way that makes sense? And you want to make sure that you describe the project that doesn't line up dominoes, such that if domino 5 does not fall, all those subsequent dominoes also do not fall. It's achievable, you have the right expertise, and it's at the right institution. And want to have impact. So when your sponsor is reading your proposal, they're going to say, well, it's a great idea. Oh, and they have the right team of experts together. And they're R1, Global Preeminent Research University. That's AAU, go USF, right? So this is a great place to do it. However, the sponsor wants to know, will this project have impact? What is impact? How do you define impact? Why does it matter? Well, the sponsor is investing in you and your ideas, and they want your project to be achievable and to achieve its aims. So tell the sponsor what you think if this project is funded, this is what will happen. What will happen? Will you save lives? Will you increase safety? Will you improve life? What are the benefits? So in your significance section, you're going to say, here's your research question. How do we improve the research enterprise such that we reduce administrative burden on faculty so they can do what they're really good at, which is the actual research? You want to create a study design that makes sense. So you have a broader question, and then you have your objectives or study aims. And then you want to make sure that they're clear and thought out. Rookie mistake. You have a big, beautiful research question, and then you come up with all of these objectives, but those objectives may not align to the big, broader question. Or this idea doesn't well align with the sponsor's aims. So remember that we want to make sure that we understand what the sponsor cares about. We have the right sponsor. We've aligned it to the track or the RFP, and that the objectives align to the research question. And when you're thinking through the significance, these are some of the things that you want to think about. You want to state the problem very clearly, use data. If you don't know what the data is, go to the literature. How important is your problem? Who does it affect? What is the cost? And the cost may be in lives, maybe in time, but what is the cost of the problem? And one of the things that is not listed here that you should always think about is who cares? If you do this project, but no one cares, it's not likely to get funded. You have to make them care. And if you don't know how to articulate that, the best way to brainstorm about it is to talk to people outside your field. So if you're in medicine and you're thinking, I think this problem is really important, talk to somebody in maybe in economics or engineering and start getting their ideas and really fermenting what you're developing in a way that is broader, because you want your research to have an impact and knowledge and advance your field. But impact is also measured in how you can integrate and correlate that scale of potential and promise in other fields as well. And another perspective is always good. Well, almost always good. Significance. Significance is a key term that is used at most of our federal sponsors, but it may not be the word that is used at all sponsors. Intellectual merit. What is intellectual merit? Intellectual merit is there a gap in the knowledge? Does this advance knowledge? That's the intellectual merit. The significance is making change and impact that is valued, important to your peers and to the realization of solutions. By reading and writing your the sample proposals, it'll help you to have an understanding of how significance is articulated in your field. And it may differ a little bit based on what type of application you're writing. So articulating significance in a letter application, for example, may be a few sentences of this problem is extremely important as we see the increase of suicides, or as we realize in this region how many white bikes, because it's not as pedestrian friendly a transportation system, but it could be, right? So when you're describing significance in a letter application, it is brief. It's as brief as one of these sections. Whereas when you are describing it in a 15-page proposal, you want to demonstrate significance and at the same time, your level of knowledge and understanding of that problem. So you also want to pull in the citations of those people that will be peer reviewing you, right? Because your peer reviewers are the leaders of your field. What you don't want to do is see that you have a citation that you didn't include, and that person is peer reviewing you. It's like, well, how versed are they on the knowledge anyways, if they didn't cite me? And they'll look for their citations. So what is the significance of the problem? What's missing? What's the gap? And when you're teaching a class and you look across your classroom and you have your roll, right? No one takes roll and says, everybody who's not here, please raise your hand, right? It's hard to know what's missing, but the literature will help us in that when you read an article, you'll see the conclusion will say, further research needs to be. So that is one way to know. And when you see that and you say, well, Dr. Smith, 2023, in his article said, this is an area that is valued to explore more, right? We know that because it's in the literature. So that's one way you can start to think about how you articulate that and what has been tried before. When you think about, well, how do you evaluate whether this program should be funded? Why is it not funded? Why are there no projects doing this? That is another question that you can ask yourself. And I think that it's in our book. Forget which page. The Heimmuller questions. Okay, it's on page 27. So here you're thinking about, what are you trying to do, articulating your objectives? How is it done today? And what are the limits of the current practice? What is new in the approach? And why do you think it would be successful? But also, who cares? See, I didn't make this up. If you are successful, what difference will it make? What are the risks to doing it, or what are the risks of not doing it? How much will it cost? How long will it take? And what are the midterm or final exams for success? So those are guiding questions that can help you. But when you're going for Department of Defense money, for example, DARPA and other of the military branches, they use these Heimmuller questions as their template. So these are the questions that they want you to answer when you're putting in the application. Is it novel? Is it innovative? Is it new? Many of these applications say this is one of the very first things we're going to peer review on. How can you tell them if it's innovative? How can you demonstrate that it's novel? And it may not be new to the world, but new in the way that you apply it. Well, in pharmacy, they do this. So we would like to apply this as a solution in nursing. Or in the health industry, they do this. And we would like to apply this to social science. So it may not be new to the world, but it may be new to the way that you apply it. And when you're writing your grant, you want to think about the words that you use, because one, words are important, and two, if you are communicating clearly, then it's easier for the person to buy in. You want it to be reviewer friendly. Remember that one, you're talking to the top of your field. Peer review is a sacred service, right? We are inviting them to give their time. Their time is valuable. And they're reading 10, 15, 20 proposals, of which they're all good ideas. They're all critically written. They all went through some level of, I'm really thinking about this. This is really important to me. I'm spending 8 weeks preparing this. So when you're in that you've made it, just submitting your grant, it's itself a success. But now you're in a peer review, and this person is peer reviewing you, and they're going to have to choose 2 of the 10 or 15 proposals that I want to argue for, champion for at the panel discussion. Which 2 do I want to champion? So you're already among the best because you made it there. How do you get funded? And this is where you are conveying information, you're conveying your innovation in a way that gets your peer reviewer to say, this is the one. So don't use words that are jargon. Don't make up a new acronym and use it throughout and not defining it on every single page. Make it reader friendly. So if you're going to say, have a heart study, and it's going to, your acronym is healing, adolescence, respiratory therapeutics or something. It spells heart, it's heart therapy that will improve the way that respiratory therapy will improve heart health, right? Something, making it up on the fly. Because you've made up a acronym, you then can put it as your title, you can put it throughout your document, but what you don't want to do is say it once on page 1, and then on page 7, they're like, what was that acronym again? They have to go back and look. Make it reader friendly. This is just one example of making it reader friendly, recognizing that they have to read a lot of things. They're going to be tired. They're doing it on their weekend. Make it reader friendly, whether it's a new instrument, a new methodology, a new acronym. You want to tell them, show them, and define what you want them to understand. So you tell them in your first page, you show them in your illustrations, and you define it through your methodology. So how will your project address the need? So you have a solution. It may be in a new methodology. You're going to tell them what you're going to do. I'm going to develop the plan. I'm going to execute the plan. And these are the results. Okay, so if that's what your proposal says, and that's all that it says, then they're going to say, how are they going to do it really? Seems like a black box. It's a great idea, but I'm not sure how they're going to do it. So you want to break it down step by step, what you're going to do. We're going to bring people into a room. We're going to provide these questions. We're going to ask them, we're going to incentivize it with gift cards. Tell them exactly what you're going to do. So yeah, I even have a slide on it. When you think about how you're going to pull this information together, you want to do it in a way that is convincing and clear and compelling. So most of the proposals that you'll see in open grants will tell you we have the approach, we have the significance. And when you look at their table of contents, that's what you'll see. You'll see all NIH grants have the exact same table of contents. It's going to be overview and significance and approach and innovation because it's prescriptive. NIH says this is what they want you to have. NSF wants you to cover intellectual merit. NSF wants you to say what are your broader impacts, but how you say it is up to you, right? So if you look at a project and you look at those 15 pages, it's going to have a header that says, broader impacts or intellectual merit, or it may say, this is how we're going to make change, or this is what we're, our methodology, our integrated plan, right? It's going to have the handlebars throughout the project description that tells you what you're going to do. And the peer reviewers are going to have this expectation. So whether you call it project description or methodology or approach, they should be able to flip through your proposal, go to that page, and they should have a pretty good idea of what you're going to cover in that section. So if it's approach or methodology, they mean pretty much the same thing. This is your logos. This is how you tell them what you're going to do, how you're going to do it, right? So Year one, we're going to plan, we're going to do a national landscape study. In year two, we're going to pilot the project and do a snapshot of how this is going to work. And we're going to do an evaluation. We're going to bring in an external evaluator. And year three, we're going to scale it to statewide, right? So you want to tell them the details. You want to give it to them over a timeline, and you want all of these pieces, the elements of your proposal, to agree. Yes.
We have a question from Abdullah. He'd like to know, would you mind providing some examples of objectives? How detailed are they compared to hypothesis, for instance?
That's great. It's a great question. And we do go into this. I'm not sure if it's in this slide deck or the next one. However, but the hypothesis is your overview question. And then those objectives are those specific aims that come underneath that hypothesis. So if you believe that a better busing system in Hillsborough County will provide reliable transportation and bring more people to work and improve X, Y, and Z. So you'll have your hypothesis statement, better bus system will do this. And then X, Y, and Z will be, better routes, better drivers, and those objectives and how you measure those objectives relative to your hypothesis. Make sense? Okay. The rules of the roads, the rules of the road is probably why I was thinking about buses. Should be objective, empirical, accessible, transparent. That's our language. Repeatable and cumulative. So what does that mean? Repeatable, cumulative, right? For example, if I put together a proposal and I say, here's a methodology, and I've described all the steps of how I'm going to do it. Someone else, completely different, but in my field that understands what I'm doing, should be able to come in and do exactly the same thing, and the results should be the same. It's like following a recipe. If I say, this is how you make pineapple upside down cake, I should be able to give the recipe to someone else, and they should be able to follow it and make the same cake. Now, when you think about studies, you're going to do literature review, and you're going to look at how other studies are done or how they've been accomplished. What you'll see is, and this is a really great thing to do, especially for graduate students in the audience. If you are early in the beginning of your research journey and you want to do a project that's done already. And that creates validity. You want to validate previous studies. If a study has been done once at the University of Minnesota and the findings are really amazing, there's a saying, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is, right? So validate the study. You do it. And the University of Florida does it and the University of Minnesota does it, and they both have the same results. What are you doing? You're proving that those amazing results are achievable, right? Validating it. So that's what we mean by repeatable and cumulative. So if the University of Minnesota does it and the University of Florida does it, and they both have amazing results, then 1 + 1 is 2. You're improving the scale as well as cumulative. Cumulative also is, okay, you've done this, amazing. How do you do more? What do you do next? And you do it while following the rules, right? Now, when you're working at a research university, you live these rules, you breathe them because they're like your Bible, right? This is called the claw. In my field, everybody knows what it is. But when you go to a zoologist, they think claw, they think something different, right? But this talks about micro purchases, small purchases, sealed bids, right? These are the rules of the road. And you don't have to know the rules of the road. You need to know a research administrator that knows the rules to the road. So that when you're writing a grant, you can say, research administrator, am I following all the rules? Most of the rules are going to be around money. Are you investing the money right? Are you scaling your project, your budget? Are you asking for money that aligns to the scope of work, right? So those internal controls, those sub-recipient rules, make sure that you're working with somebody who understands them. And if you're at an organization that does not have research administration, then work with a university in your area, or come back and talk to me and say, how do I know what the rules of the road are? Because there are hundreds of rules. It's like tax law. You can know all the ones that are relevant to your research and still not all know all of tax law.
Sandy, Michelle has a question. Do you want to go ahead, Michelle?
Hey, yes, sorry, I lost my voice and I also put it in the chat. But I asked, does research get funded that aims to validate others' research? I haven't heard of that before, but I was just wondering.
Oftentimes it's internally funded.
Okay. So just at the institution?
Yeah.
Okay.
But why do you want to do it? If you're an early PI, for example, and you want to validate a study, it also will help when you're building that early career grant application. It demonstrates that you as an individual, a PI, and your institution has the capability and capacity to do that research. So it doesn't just validate it.
Okay. And would that same thing work for submitting a grant to maybe like NSF or NIH, or probably not?
David's favorite answer. It depends. It depends.
Okay.
So is it a study that you want to replicate? Why? Why do you want to replicate it, right? So some of it is you maybe have a different demographic. Here in Sarasota, we have an older demographic than most regions of the country. So it could be that we want to see if something works in a different demographic. So it depends. When you want to explore an idea, say, I want to do a validation study of X, right? And you say, NSF funded the first study on the other side of the world, or NSF funded this study and they looked at X and I want to look at Y, right? And you're thinking, this might be a really good thing for us to do, but you're not sure. This is where you take the concept tool and use it to your advantage. So what is a concept tool? At NSF, they welcome one-page proposals, and they go through a portal that's at NSF, brand new, and it goes to the program officer, and the program officer reviews it and goes, this really aligns with this funding opportunity, or this is really a great idea. Let's give Michelle the opportunity to apply for a 2-year planning grant or a eager proposal. Does that help, Michelle?
Yes, that was perfect. Thank you.
Excellent.
And then I have one follow-up. Can the same be applicable to a grant proposal that would develop an academic program that would validate the same or similar curriculum of a program at another university?
Same answer. 1, it depends. 2, maybe it depends on the idea. And I would shop it to the program officer and see if it would be something that they'd be willing to support. Okay. Now, I want to make sure that I touch on these things regarding the rules of the road, because they're extremely important. When you're working in an institution, whether that's a school system or a library or a FFRDCF federally funded research lab, whether it's in the US or anywhere in the world, there will be internal controls. The internal controls are those things, those policies, those checks and balances within your organization that ensures that you're, one, being ethical, One of the biggest internal controls that you'll hear about are things like IRB. That you're being correct in the way that you're invoicing and the way that you're calculating the value of your time, whether that's 11% on a project for a 9-month faculty, or if you're looking at a industry project, which creates a salary that is blended. So you have your salary plus your benefits in one billable hour, right? So it wants to make sure that you're not creating numbers. You're not saying, but I really deserve getting paid $100 an hour, but really you only are $75 an hour. Well, making sure those internal controls are there are very important. Subrecipient monitoring, the same thing. When you're the lead of a grant and your grant is at the University of South Florida and you're going to do a sub, you have a collaborator who's going to be on the grant also, but they're at another university, so they're going to get a sub award. You're responsible as a lead investigator to know what you're doing, that you're following all the rules, and that you're achieving the aims of your project and that of the sub. You brought the sub onto this project. You're responsible for them. So subrecipient monitoring means that as a PI, you're calling them and saying, so how's that going? Or you're emailing them. Could you give me an update? Because that project is a part of the bigger project. And as the lead, you're responsible. Cost sharing. Cost sharing means anything that the sponsor's not paying for. The sponsor is going to pay for all your direct costs. If it's mandatory, the grant will say, as you develop your budget, 10% of this budget must be covered by other funds. Maybe that other funds is the institution. Maybe those other funds are an industry partner, but it's another fund. That's a mandatory. Voluntary is, but you don't have to pay me. I do this out of the goodness of my heart, right? So you're volunteering your time, but your time has a value. So that is voluntary. If you put in your proposal, but I'm not going to ask for any of my time on this project, I'm just going to give it away. If you put in your proposal and they fund it, guess what? You now have cost share. Whether or not you wanted it, whether or not it's in your budget, you now have cost share because you committed to it in your project description and they funded it. In uniform guidance, it says that whatever cost share you have, whatever form that it is, it must be tracked and it must be reported. So you have volunteers on your project, that's fantastic. How do you track that? Maybe it's timesheets, but whatever you do not have cost share and not track it because it will be reportable at the end of the year. Time and effort reporting is something that will be reported at every institution, and it's typically based on how much money your personnel time is being charged to the grant. Now, I know that as a researcher, you're thinking about your research all the time. So it does not necessarily map to how many, do you work 40 hours a week? But I think about my research 100 hours a week. So it's not how much you're thinking about the grant or thinking about the research. It's really how much you're dedicating in time and reflecting it in payroll. Yep.
Can the sub on an HBCU specific grant be non-HBCU, or is that dependent on the grant?
If your organization is an HBCU, then that is an HBCU, right? You can't change your organizational type. But there are some grants that say in the eligibility, this program requires you to partner with MSIs, minority serving institutions, or that only a minority serving institution can apply, but you can have other organizations partner. If the latter, and only minority serving institutions may apply, then You can sub to a non-minority serving institution, but that lead needs to be. When the subrecipient is an HBCU, they are still going to be an HBCU on that sub. It doesn't change their type. Not sure if I completely got it. Did that answer your question?
We'll wait to see.
Okay. So when you're developing grants and you say, this is my sponsor, I go to NSF. Here's the funding opportunity I'm going to apply for. I'm early career. I'm going to go for a career grant. Then you're going to have a checklist of all of your elements. Now, most grants are 12 to 15 pages, single spaced, in your project description or your research summary, right? This is where you define what you're going to do, why it's important, how you're going to do it, right? 12 to 15 pages. But keep in mind that your grant is between 120 and 150 pages. Where do all those other pages come from? That's your biographical sketch or your CV, your bibliography, your budget, and your budget will be by project year. And we cover it very comprehensively in week 6. And you're going to create a plan for your research. And when you're thinking about, okay, I'm in education, I'm going to apply for the Spencer Foundation grant. I've applied for federal grants, so the foundation grant should be easy, right? Not so. Foundation grants can be every bit as rigorous and challenging as writing a federal grant. So do not go into a foundation grant thinking that it's going to be easier, faster, or better. It should be, you should go into every research project with the intention of giving it the same level of effort, no matter the sponsor type. All the sponsors are going to have a system that you're going to apply to. The University of South Florida oversees a portfolio of over $600 million a year. And across that portfolio is 200 or more systems that our sponsor research administrators have to be in to submit and to manage the money. So you'll want to know what the ERA system is. I put it there ERA because when you're talking to a research administrator, they will ask you, so have you got a profile in the ERA? It's like, what's an ERA? It's an electronic research system, right? It's the administrative system for their proposal submissions. At Spencer Foundation, it's called Smart Simple. And at NSF, it is research.gov. If you're at NIH, it's called Assist. If you're in grants.gov, it's called Workspace. At National Institutes of Justice, it's Just Grants. At NASA, it's NSpires. And those are just a few. So the best practice is, you know what you're going to apply for, you know what your sponsor is, and it's 8 weeks away from the application deadline. Go and create a profile in the application system. Open up the application, see what it requires, because the sponsor and the project officer has created this RFP, the request for proposal, and put tons of effort into trying to make sure that they've covered everything. They want it like a jar of ragu. It's in there, right? But they may have forgotten something. But you'll see what they forgot, because when you go into the sponsor's application system, it will say, here are all the things that you need to download. Here are all the forms that you need to use. Here are all the things that we want you to have in your application. And you'll see a sponsor form library. I have one here as an example. This is from grants.gov, and it'll tell you the types of forms that you're going to need. When you go into grants.gov, it's going to say, here are the things that are required. It's probably 4 things. And then here are the things that are optional, which is a much longer list. And sometimes it doesn't tell you what's optional. You need to know it. Gosh, how do you know it? Because you read the RFP, every page. So you have the form version. The form version changes. Just because you downloaded the form last year doesn't mean that's the right form this year. So every year, every application, download the form for that application. You'll see instructions. The instructions are just like doing your taxes. So sometimes you need to see, oh, what did 24C mean in your taxes? And you'll look up the instructions on 24C. You know what all these other things are, 1 through 23. You've done your taxes many times. So looking at the instructions will help you, especially the first time around. Download the instructions, peruse through them, see if there's anything that is clarifying as you move forward through the forms. The instructions will not tell you how to apply for the grant. The instructions will tell you how to use the form. Grant writing is not the same thing as academic writing. When you're an academic and you go through and you're getting your PhD, they're teaching you how to write as a scholar, right? Which oftentimes is past oriented. This is what we've seen. This is how it's happened, right? And it's peer audience focused. So in academic writing, you're only writing to the top of your field. When you're writing to a foundation, that foundation may not have a board that represents the top of your field. They may have a board of donors or legislators or stakeholders. So you have to write to your peer reviewers. You need to know who your peer reviewers are. In academic writing, that's always going to be the top of your field because you're going to be writing to your journal, right? But in grant writing, you want to write to the people that are going to be funding you. You want to write to intellectual non-experts, especially that one-page summary. So you'll have 120 pages, of which one page will be the abstract, the research strategy, the project summary. The different sponsors call it different things. But if it's a small paragraph or a one page that describes the body of work that you're proposing, that page should be written for a lay audience. Now, it's been said that if you know your field and you know your research, you know your science, then you should be able to explain it to someone who doesn't know your science. It speaks to how well you know it, right? I've heard in grant writing workshops where you say, well, how would you describe it to your grandmother? How would you talk to a friend from another field? So if you're in pharmacy, how do you describe what you do or how your research makes a difference to someone in religious studies? Or how would someone in philosophy explain the importance of the research that the philosophy professor is doing in understanding Kant and the impact in science to an engineer? So being able to have that language, have those skills in that first page. Why is it so important that we have that in the first page? Where is that being used? When you go to NSF and you say, well, I want to apply for this grant. What's been funded before? You can click and it says, here are all the grants that have been funded by this funding mechanism before. And what's public? The name of the PI, the sponsor, the amount of money they received, the institution that they're at, and their project summary. That project summary that should be for a lay audience. So you go out to that project summary and see what are they proposing. And you want to use active language. Active language is I will, I have, because you want to demonstrate, and it's really hard to do. I'm going to make it sound simple, but it is certainly not. You want to demonstrate enthusiasm for your project. How do you do that? With active language. And we're going to dig more into that. But before we do, I'm going to breeze through these slides. You have them. And hopefully you have research administrators that are working with you too. But every year, just like they change tax law, they change rules around electronic research administration. And the best way to navigate changes is to go into those applications and look at them. The institutional facts, when you're at an institution, say you're an early career faculty member at, I don't know, Illinois State, and you're doing a really great job, you have some grants now, and you have the tag, and you put all your institutional facts in there, right? Your DUNS number and all that. But then let's say you leave Illinois State, not that anyone ever leaves there because it's a great place to work, but you leave and you go to, Humboldt. You go to Humboldt, you're going to do some great work there, then you need to have all those institutional facts. Just like ORCID describes that this is you, your institutional facts say this is your institution. And the institutions are going to show capacity to your research. If you're doing human studies, if you're doing animal studies, you should have IRB, IACUC, biosafety, whatever it is that you're doing should be reflected in your institutional description. And if you haven't yet, if you're going to do human subjects or IACUC, any of these things, then you want to think through that application as well and have those elements so that you can describe what you're going to do and in a very concrete, well thought out design. Your institutional requirements. So some funding opportunities are going to say, we will allow 2 per organization. If you have an organization like USF, you have 6,000 faculty across 3 or 4 campuses, but you're only allowed to submit 2 proposals to this incredible funding opportunity. It's going to fund a room full of cutting edge equipment or modernization of a lab or allow you to recruit new faculty or whatever it is, right? You can only do 2. And what happens is an organization will have a limited submission of vetting process that you will submit a small version of a proposal to a panel, a research council or an advisory board. And then they will say, we received 15 applications and have submitted 2 for the vice president of research or president to allow to move forward, right? So if it says it's limited submission, make sure that you've gone through that process because you don't want to do all this work only to be told by sponsored research, I'm sorry, you can't do this because these people went through the limited submission process and you didn't. Authorization to submit. If you're submitting to a federal sponsor or a state sponsor, it will say within your guidelines that the application will be submitted by the AOR, your authorized sponsored research person. Now, universities, that is always the president. Do you think the president is sitting there going click, click, click for 300 proposals every month? They are not. It's delegated to sponsored research, which is why universities have a sponsored research office. It's delegated and they have one person typically saying, this is your AOR, right? So you want to make sure that you do all of the things that you need as an institution to go through sponsored research and give that information in a timely way so that they can review your documents and submit it for consideration. National Institutes of Health. They have funding priorities. They have those funding priorities communicated in their strategic plans. So when you decide, okay, this is my sponsor, then you want to read about your sponsor, you want to sign up for their newsletters, you want to know what their strategic funding priorities are, and you want to know how your research fits. And you want to be able to speak to it in your proposal, and you want to speak to it when you talk with and build a rapport with your program officer. In your biographical sketch, right now, everybody is going to be moving towards Science CV. It's an online portal where you're going to describe what your qualifications are to do this type of research. So As you see in this slide, it says, what's your format? And your format is dictated by who's your sponsor. Are you NIH? Are you NSF? Are you IES, Institute of Education Sciences? You click that and you'll see that there's also a year time as of, because things change, which also should be an indicator to you to say, when do I need to go back in and refresh that information, make sure that it's up to date? Well, some faculty will update it every time they are doing a grant. Others will say, I will do this every year as part of my annual evaluation. I will make sure everything is up to date, right? Did I lose it? I did something wrong. Sorry, guys.
Everyone, next slide, please.
I don't know what I did wrong, but I will try to fix it. I think I clicked on the link. Oh, that's what I did. Okay. Well, the links work. Yay.
There's the good.
So when you're putting in a grant, they're going to ask you, what other support do you have? At NIH, they call that the other support form. Pretty self-explanatory, right? What does this tell them? Well, it tells them, yay, they're worth funding. They've gotten other support. And look, they've completed projects, which means that they can complete projects, which shows your capacity and your capability. Let's say this is your first time ever applying. My first grant. What goes on the other support form? This grant. The grant that you're working on should always be the first one that you have on other support. And that's regardless of sponsor, because this is your first thing. And it's going to say, I'm going to do the Heroes grant. It is going to be funded by NIH. This is the project period because you know it, because you're applying right now. And you're going to put your budget in there. And it's going to say pending. Because as soon as they fund it, you'll be able to move that over to awarded. So no one doesn't have support. Everybody has support. Other forms, as I mentioned, you want to go into NIH Assist. Assist is their ERA system, and you'll want to pull down those forms, and you'll want to see. So when you do, if you're at a organization, since I already picked on Illinois State, let's pick on Georgia this time. If you're at Georgia, University of Georgia, then you're going to go in your ERA system and you're going to pull down this funding opportunity. You're going to say, hi, my name is Emily, and I'm going to do this NIH grant, and I'm at the University of Georgia, and it's going to automatically populate where you are because it knows you. You have an ERA system at your organization. It's going to pull in all of the information that it already has. Your DUNS number, your institution address, your AOR, and because you're signing in as you, it will know all of your information. And that's really great time to check. So you look at those forms and you say, it doesn't have my address. It doesn't have my cell phone number. This has the wrong email address. If it populates wrong on the form, it means that you've not registered or you've not updated your profile in that system. So make sure that the form reflects the information that you want it to reflect. A rookie mistake is that it's got an email address or something that you don't check anymore. It's like, oh, well, I only check this email now. I know it sounds squirrely, but just want to double check and make sure everything is copacetic. Another mistake that I've seen is you have address, but it doesn't have your building or your room number. Okay, you just got mail from your sponsor, but it's never going to find its way to you, right? Most of the time it's email though. So your research plan. This is the heart of your proposal. This is where you're going to say, this research is so important. This is why I want to make a contribution to the field. This is why it should be me, right? Your specific aims. So this is the 398 form. Yeah, 398 form, making sure I've got the number right. Is where you're uploading all these pieces. And these are the pieces that you're going to upload in a 398 form. Remember I said you're going to go into grants.gov or whatever, and it's going to say you only need 4 things, right? Well, those 4 things are going to need 12 things. So you're going to have a 398 form. You're going to upload your specific aims and your research strategy and your multiple PI plan and your letters of support. And it's going to have rules. It's going to have, say, if you have letters of support, because this is a partnership grant and we want you to have partners, then in your letters of support, we want it to be one PDF document. We want the first page to list all of the organizations and the organizational type, right? And then you're going to list all of them. You're going to have one PDF and you're going to upload it to letters of support, right? So resource sharing plan, your authentication of your key biological or chemical resources, your appendices, these are the things that you're going to want to upload. And they're going to be single documents, PDF in each section. So in your 398 form, it's also going to ask you questions. There are going to be some sections of this form that are fill in the blank, and some sections that are drop down or select, such as you have an IRB and you have a study that's going to look at a population. Well, what are the population demographics that you're going to look at? How many people, and what are going to be, how many of them are going to be female? How many of them are going to be under 18? All the demographics. And the same thing for the geography. If this were a National Institute of Justice grant, then it would want to know what your opportunity zones are, and that is by zip code. So you want to go into those forms now, if that's the grant you're going to apply for, and look for what it's going to ask, because it may not be clear enough from the RFP. This is why we look in advance. Now, regardless of the type of study you do, you're going to have data. You're going to either go into it with data or you're going to come out of it with data. But if it's all about knowledge, expanding knowledge, how do we do that? So when you're developing your data management plan, the management piece is how are you going to collect it? How are you going to store it? How are you going to secure it, right? If it's a human study, then how are you protecting the humans in your study, right? An extension of this is also how we share it. So you collect all this data, and NIH has this All of Us study. And All of Us study is this huge database homed by NIH, and it invites you to share anonymous data, de-identified. So it will inform decisions and inform future studies based on a greater pool of data. So that's why we're building and contributing to it. What other funding sources might benefit from a large database? Almost all of them, right? So you want to think, who's my sponsor and how do they want us to share the data? What repositories do they endorse? What repositories do they leverage on their websites? The Institute of Education Sciences has an incredible database of education research that looks at students, teacher effectiveness. So when you think about how you want to use your data, also consider how do the sponsors use the data that come from the grants that they have supported. Compliance and technology. Now, in an ever more technological world, we have so many tools to help us collect data and to ensure consent, to improve our ability to demonstrate compliance with the program. For example, biosensics. They use digital tools and analytics and wearable sensors to tell the patient and the clinician, how well a new pharmacological or a new intervention is working, right? The intervention may be different sleep patterns or a different eating pattern or walking. Interventions can be a number of things, but how do you measure it? And how do you make sure that you're collecting the data in the same way throughout the life of the project? Technology does a wonderful job of helping with that. Compliance to technology also means that you're providing the technological tools to the people in your study. So if you're using a, what do they call them? Fitbit to measure heart rate and pulse rate and all these things for a intervention for maybe you're looking at elementary students and how if you increase their exercise by just 20 minutes a day, that they perform better in STEM classes. Making it up. Then you have to give all of those people a Fitbit. And the IRB application needs to say, and we will provide them with a Fitbit. And the Fitbit, all the Fitbits in the study need to be programmed to do the same thing. And they will collect this data at this time, and it will give it to this spreadsheet or this system, right? So it's all the same. So that's how you create controls within your study. And then when I talk about that ribbon that runs through all of your pieces, so your proposal will say, this is what we're going to do. It's an exercise study that's going to improve STEM education outcomes for students that participate in PE, right? And then the data management plan says, this is how we're going to collect the data. This is the type of data we're going to use. This is how we're going to share the data, how we're going to make sure that we've protected the participants in the study also. And then in the facilities, equipment, and other supplies might describe the servers that you're using that will house the data. Or it might say, this is our partnership with Fitbit, and our Fitbit partners will provide all of the Fitbits, right? So you want all of the pieces of your proposal to resonate with what you're going to do, how you're going to do it, that you have the capacity to do it, and the resources as well. Clinical trials ask these basic 4 questions. Does the study involve human participants? Now, involving human participants may be a survey. I'm going to send out a Qualtrics survey. It's not really a clinical trial, is it? No, it's really a survey, but it still involves human subjects. Clinical trials must also have progressively assigned intervention. And a clinical study will also evaluate the effect of that intervention. The intervention may not be a pill that they take. It may be walking the floor, or it might be so many things. 100 things come to mind. But when you're thinking about your intervention, that intervention is something that you're adding to that person's day, right? Or maybe taking away. In the effect, how is it evaluated, that intervention? Are you trying to change the way they do things, a behavioral change, or is it going to have a biomedical change? Is it going to change their pulse rate? Is it going to bring down their blood pressure? And clinical trials, I want to make sure to keep this in here because this is a really great resource. It's from the National Institute of Aging. If you are new to clinical trials, what will happen is you'll go to NIH. NIH is, I think, 21 different centers and institutes focused around specific areas of research. One of those institutes is the National Institute of Aging, right? So they have guidance for clinical trials in aging. So if you know that your study is going to be around substance abuse, then you want to go to SAMHSA and look at their clinical trials guidance. There may be something very specific to clinical trials in the area that you're going to be looking at. So when you go to your IRB and you do city training and you're doing all of the general understanding of what it is to get an IRB. That's great. But to get a more granular understanding, you want to look at the guidance specifically for the type of research that you're looking at. And they're typically just videos. They're easy to understand, but it's really terrific to do that, especially if you're early in the process. So in section 2 of your clinical trials, you're going to dig down into age limits, population, recruitment, retention. And this is where you're going to describe things like gift cards or transportation. And you'll also want to be able to say, here's my study timeline and your enrollment. Now, when you're doing a budget for a clinical trial, you're going to include costs that say, we're going to market this recruitment. We're going to create materials for recruitment. They expect that you're going to have budget line items for that. Just like when you're doing your data management plan and you have a data management plan that says, we're going to secure this data on a secure server so that we ensure the integrity over a 10-year span. If that's part of your data management plan, it wouldn't be surprising to see a secure server in your budget. That ribbon just goes through all the pieces. And you want to protect the people in your study, right? Now, this is a toolbox in National Institute of Mental Health. And there they talk about what you need specifically for mental health clinical trials. And one of those might be a safety monitoring plan specifically for mental health patients. So NIH has, you must have a data and safety monitoring plan, and that'll be for all types of clinical studies. But is there something specific that you should have in a data and safety monitoring plan that is specific to the institute or center that you're applying to? Okay. Before we move on to NSF, do we have any health medicine researchers that have questions now?
I don't.
Yay, okay. So we're going to move on to the National Science Foundation. And the National Science Foundation looks at research in a different way, in that they are looking at STEM research, they're not looking at health. You have the National Science Foundation and you have National Institutes of Health. So what would you never ever do? You would never send a heart study to the National Science Foundation. You would never send an engineering study to National Institute of Health. Never, never, never say never. All right, because you have biomedical engineering and you have all these pharmaceutical solutions that have social science impacts, right? So everything is everything, but you want to make sure that you send it to the right institution, right sponsor for the right purpose. Yes.
And Michelle does have a question now. Michelle, go ahead.
Hi, yes, I do have a question. What if you're in one of those fields that it overlaps, where it's interdisciplinary and it has a health component and it also has a STEM component? That's
a great question, because sometimes what you'll do is you'll look at the life of your project, right? And you'll say, here's an interdisciplinary grant that the overview is interdisciplinary, so you see the integration. And then you see the STEM elements of your proposal. Phase 1, we're going to look at the engineering of fixing X, Y, and Z. And then phase 2 will be, we're going to take that engineering intervention and we're going to put it in a clinical trial, right? So sometimes it's all one sponsor can do one thing. You're going to create the intervention and then you're going to test and pilot the intervention in a clinical trial. Sometimes, though, it is a study that warrants 2 sponsors. Maybe you do the engineering piece at NSF, and then the health impact, the clinical trial at NIH. And sometimes your study is global and says, we're going to do this, and we want to make sure that we're partnering with this organization over here in Germany or Australia or France. And When you go to NSF, you'll see that there are a number of funding opportunities that say NSF has partnered with Japan to look at this, right? Because it's a problem in Japan and it's a problem in Hawaii. So we think that this is an opportunity for more than one sponsor to come together. The most recent example of that is the Global Centers for Climate Change, where the centers all have an international partner. So last week we talked about how the philosophy professor had an NSF grant and an NEH grant, right? You have parts of it that were humanities and parts of it were science, and together it made a full project. The same thing applies here. When you're looking at a project, at the life of the project, you might want to break it down and have two sponsors, or you may want to pull it together and say this fits under this program, biomedical engineering at NSF, for example. And if you develop it and you're like, I don't know if they're going to fund it like this, the best person to ask is your program officer. Send the one pager and say, here's my idea, this is what I want to do, and here are the 3 phases of the project, and have a conversation. When you reach out to a program officer, what you don't want to do is give them yes or no. Can you just tell me if I should apply? That's a yes or no question. Always say, here's a project summary. I'd love to have a half-hour conversation. Can we schedule a virtual conversation? Does that help?
Yes, that was great. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. So NSF looks at the science of science, and David has another question.
I do. Bill would like to know, where do we usually find social science grant opportunities like management or organization behavior?
Well, social science sponsors, there are foundations that fund social science, but there's also NSF. NSF is of all the federal programs, NSF funds more social science than any other federal sponsor. But there are also 300, I think, foundations that will fund social science related research. And we talked last week about how to find some of those funding opportunities. Does that help?
We'll wait to find out.
Okay, great. Okay, so
Yes.
NSF has determined through the science of examining the data that they've received on proposals that it takes about 6 to 8 weeks or 120 hours to develop a proposal. Once your proposal is submitted, they are going to go through this process of peer reviewing it, right? And the first step is to make sure that it makes it to peer review. What you want to avoid is this section at the top that says returned without peer review. That means the program officer didn't read it. It never made it to the peer reviewer. It was never assigned to anyone to read. It was returned. And that means that you didn't include something that was required, or you included something that was not allowed. NSF does not allow cost share. Remember we talked about cost share? If you include cost share, they'll just return it to you. So make sure that you're following all of the rules and you're doing everything right. It used to be a biographical sketch allowed 5 synergistic activities. And then it still will until October. So if you're putting it in today, then you could do a traditional biographical sketch and include 5 synergistic activities. But now they say, we want to know everything that you're doing. So do Science CV and have everything in there's no page limits. They'll allow everything. So when you're thinking about your rules, how many people have a proposal that's submitted and yet returned without review because of something silly? I used half-inch margins instead of 1-inch margins. Return without review. I have 6 things listed on my biographical sketch, but it only allows 5. Returned without review. You do not want this to happen. At an R1 institution, those things have so many checks and balances because you're going to submit it to your sponsor research office 5 days in advance of the actual sponsor deadline. And they're going to go through your proposal page by page and make sure you've followed all the rules and there's nothing out of line. But what about those PIs? I know it never happens at your institution. No. Where you submit the grant to sponsor research on the day that it's due? No. So what's happening in the federal landscape is that the research.gov, the assist, these ERA systems are now checking. So when you do something and it's checking it, when you upload it, and it says, this now has 6 pages, you're only allowed 5. It'll give you a little red indicator saying, this will get a return without review. It gives you a red flag, you better download it and go, what happened? Sometimes it's you did it in a software, and then when you converted it to a PDF, it added a page. Oh my goodness, I cannot tell you how many blank pages I have deleted. It happens. So check your work, and when you upload it, make sure, and a very good thing to do, the best practice is before you release it to the sponsor research administrator, send it to print it as PDF, as your full document, and then just go through it. You're 120 pages of going, yeah, that looks all right, that looks right, that looks right. Because then if you come to page 63 and it's blank, it's like, huh, what's that? Your NSF proposal is many pages, and it represents a ton of your work, your effort, weeks of developing the grant that is followed by, you don't even start your grant, don't even begin to write it until you've done months and months of your own studies to develop preliminary data, to really think about it, to demonstrate your knowledge by putting out publications, right? So to get you to where you are and to be at the end and have it returned without review, it's painful. So here are some of we're going to talk about what will get it returned. At NSF, if you have a URL of any kind in your project description, it will get returned without review. Why is that? That's a crazy rule. We're talking about building websites. Of course, I'm going to have website addresses in my project description. Well, NSF has determined that adding websites to the project description infers to the peer reviewers that we expect you to go out to websites. And we don't want the peer reviewers to feel like they have that additional burden. So instead, you may describe websites in your project description. And if you have URLs that you want to use to demonstrate your understanding of websites, you may put them in your bibliography. Right, so just as an example. When you go out to research.gov, I don't know about you guys, but I'm in so many systems that I used to keep a list of, here are all my passwords. No IT security guy ever wants to hear that. You what? You have a list? Is underneath your keyboard? That's crazy. So NSF and all these other systems, they make it very easy for you. Did you forget your password? That's okay. Just go in, create another password. But they all have rules, and all the rules are different. Personally, I think the hardest ones are grants.gov, because it won't let you use any word that you would find in the dictionary in your password. So it's like, okay, well, Tomorrowland is right out. So you have to follow the rules, and you have to have a password. And now in this new modern age of cybersecurity, it also will be dual authenticated, right? So you'll have to have a cell phone or an email address that maps to it. If your email address is, say, Sandy Justice at Emory, I tell you, I do not check that email address anymore. So make sure that it's an email address that will follow you. And if you go to another institution, make sure you update it so that you have an email address so dual authentication works. Oh, keep doing that. How do I do that? Okay, so, and like any good system, they have tons and tons of tutorials throughout it. And it will tell you, now we've automated compliance checks. This is what it's going to mean. And when you're finished uploading all of your documents, you then have the option of sharing it with your AOR, right? They'll give you the requirements for your key personnel. So every person that is paid on your budget will have to do these things. They'll have to do your science CV. They'll have to have a current and pending document. They'll have to have collaborators and other affiliations. And they use these documents so that they can say, are there conflicts of interest? Can I invite these people that are onto the peer review panel because they have this expertise? So the project officer at your sponsor will say, here are all the people listed on their CR, what do they call it? Collaborations and other affiliations. So if John is applying to get this $500,000 grant, and John has said, and I got my PhD working with Sally. Well, Sally then is not eligible to review John's grant, right? Because there's a conflict of interest. So these are the types of things that they're looking for. And when you're thinking about your elements of your grant, which are many, you want to create a plan in the beginning that says, here are all the elements of my grant. These are all the things I need to do. If you're working with a team, then you say, here are the 26 things we need for our project, and who can help do this? So you can start a management plan, a data management sharing plan, a postdoc mentoring plan, whatever it is. And you can create that shared workspace. Maybe it's Google Docs, or maybe it's Workspace. And you create that document space so that you can create as a team all of these elements. Oh, I forgot to mention something. It's on the previous page. It's about open science. So you'll hear a lot about intellectual property. How am I protecting your intellectual property, your ideas? That's you, right? And ORCID maps to you and identifies as you, so no one else can go in as John Smith. There's a lot of John Smiths. Let's make sure that we know which John Smith you are, right? And we want you not share your data because it's your intellectual property, but we want you to have a plan to share your data because we want to expand knowledge, right? So how do you toggle those two ideas? You want to protect your intellectual property, and we do that through disclosure process. If you have something that will be patentable or lead to a license, then you want to work with Tech Transfer Office or the patent office. Let's say you're at a library or a lab that doesn't have a tech transfer office, then you go directly to the US Patent Office. You want to protect, disclose your ideas. And data sharing, that is data that is already gone through the review process, that is either going to be published or will be published soon. That is the information that you want to put out and share it. Describing your research environment. This speaks to the achievableness of your research. Can you actually do it where you are? If you are doing something that requires a special microscope, prove that you have your microscope. And describe the core facilities, the equipment, the infrastructure. Sometimes that infrastructure is graduate students. You know, that you're going to do a study and the graduate students are going to work with undergraduate students. We're going to create mentoring, whatever that resource is, whatever that requirement is for that research, describe it here in facilities, equipment, and other resources. Other resources might also include technology. Do you have the technology in your university to provide that element? So if you're doing cybersecurity, you have a secure site, SOC, a SOC, this is where you describe it. National Endowment for the Humanities and other foundations. I put it this way on this slide so that it reminds me that when you look at the pie chart for all federal funding, right, You're looking at this big pie chart and it says Department of Defense, it's a big triangle. And you say National Institutes of Health and Department of Human Health and Health Services, big triangle. Where's the humanities, right? That little bitty line that says, other, right? That is education, Institute of Education Sciences, National Endowment for Humanities, National Endowments for the Arts. It's so much. And because they get so little, it's incredibly competitive. So when you're writing, you want to really make that relationship with your program officer. All these things that we're talking about, you want to do them and take it with great rigor and great seriousness. Digital Humanities and Advancement Grants. So this is just one example. We talked about how any NSF will return it if you have cost sharing. Whereas these, there are many funding opportunities that will say cost sharing is required. You must have cost sharing. So, and cost sharing may be in the form of in kind. We're going to give it space. We're going to give it students. We're going to incorporate it to the curriculum. Or it could be a cash contribution. We're going to buy this Jeep as part of our project. We're going to put all kinds of humanities and arts things around the Jeep. We're going to make it a wrap, and it's going to go to all of these communities, and our institution is going to pay for half of it. That's a cash contribution. So you go out, you read about your sponsor, you look that they have here, an application is available. That's when you can go and look at your application. Then the optional draft, you can submit it before you submit it, right? And that way you get feedback. And then the actual application deadline. When you go to NEH or NEA or any of these other institutions, you're going to go through grants.gov. And grants.gov catches a lot of these federal sponsors as their application system. And just as we just discussed that when you go to research.gov or you go to assist, it's going to know who you are and your organization is. The same applies here. When you put in your funding opportunity here, it's going to preload all of that information about that package. And it's going to tell you, here are the 4 things that you need, right? And those 4 things are going to open up and you're going to see all of the things that you need within those 4 things, right? So don't just look at it here. Open these up and see what they're going to ask for. And then you're going to see optional forms and the downloading instructions. And this application package forms download of instructions, this is specific to those forms. And you see across the top that you have forms, view your application, attachments, participants, and activity. And then when you have let's say you're applying for 4 or 5 grants, and they're all going to go through grants.gov. Then you're going to have a portal and it's going to say, which grant do you want to look at now? The good thing is it saves them so that you'll be able to go back and go, what did I do last year? Spencer Foundation, it's not grants.gov, it's a private foundation. They go through Smart Simple, right? But much of the application elements are the same. When we talk about how do I write a grant? You write it clearly, comprehensively, use active language, use future tense, right? All of these things, these elements of your grant, it translates across any type of sponsor that you're using. And it translates to the types of grants that you're going to apply for. Sometimes you're going to apply for research. Sometimes you're going to apply for a program, a training program, for example, or a conference grant, or buying a piece of equipment. So when you're looking at these forms, what do you want to know? This, when you're developing a project title, you want it to be a strong title. You want your acronyms. If you create an acronym for your title, you want it to reflect the research, right? So you don't want to say HEART is my acronym and then it be about Heartline busing, because no one's going to go HEART, bus. Those 2 things just don't automatically go together. And the duration. Sometimes sponsors will say how many years, how many months, And so you put in a number of months, and typically it will be in a number of years. So you wouldn't put in 50 months. It'd be 12, 24, 36. And then it wants you to know what range, about how much money do you need to do this project. It is very difficult to, in the beginning, say, this feels like $125,000, right? Or rookie mistake, they allow $500,000. So I'm sure I can make this a $500,000 project. Look at the scope of work, develop your business plan and your budget that aligns with that scope of work. And then what that budget is, that will help you determine what tier you're in. And here it says we limit 15% indirect costs. We're going to talk about indirect costs much more in week 6, but 15% is low, super low. As a country, under uniform guidance, we are capped at 26% of administrative support. It is costs a lot more money than 26% to administer and manage a grant, any grant, whether that's $100,000 or $100 million. Because administering a grant means that they're going to track those cost shares, they're going to invoice those sponsors, they're going to do financial reports. It's an enterprise. The best practice is to review your application and review it well in advance. When you go into these forms, you'll see that there are drop downs, there are check boxes that you would not have known about from an RFP. So first thing, find your grant opportunity. Second thing, go into that grant opportunity. Read the RFP and think about how you're going to apply. Wait, dang. Oops. Okay. So when you're thinking about your foundations, I know I'm getting towards the end, and I'm sorry that we don't have more time for just chatting. But when you're thinking about your foundations, just like federal sponsors, they sometimes will require a phased approach to your application. For example, at the Alfred Sloan, they want a letter of intent, and then from there, a proposal. A lot of foundations receive a lot of grants, a lot of letters of intent, and letters of intent will allow the foundation to say, I invite you to apply. Or I regret that we do not have a program that fits this need at this time. At the letter of intent stage, you're not going to get the level of peer review feedback that you would if you were applying to NSF and submitting a full proposal. So that is one of the downsides of letters of intent. And foundations do this on purpose because they receive so many and they want to make sure that they're only inviting to apply those that align with their strategic aims, that are focused on the same things that they care about, and are the types of projects that resonate as achievable. So how to accomplish that in a letter of intent is a very challenging thing to do because you have to also do it in a way that's brief. I think it might be on the next slide. Well, what was it? Mark Twain said, if you'd given me longer, I would have written it more briefly. Yep. So when you go to Alfred Sloan, what I've done is included here. This is taken directly from a sample proposal, right? And these are the guidelines. So total impact is the proposal. When you go into the proposal, this is how this applicant has done the headers: problem, related work, proposers, approach, right? And it aligns with their letter of intent and their proposal. So when they did the letter of intent, they said, here's the problem, here's some of the related work, right? and here's what our approach will be. And then when they do the full proposal, they're following the same outline, they're just expanding. Instead of just saying, here's what our approach will be, they'll say our approach is, and here's the input, here's the output, here's the presentation. So when you do a letter of intent, you're doing it with the end in mind and thinking, well, what will we want to have in the proposal? And you want to be consistent. For Alfred Sloan, for example, they really like short-term outcomes and long-term outcomes. So a lot of those things are aligns with what they ask for. And total impact, then at the end of your project, you're going to report what is it that you accomplished with the funding that we gave you. Here's what we said we would do. Here's what we did. Here are the outcomes, right? So when you read things like this, we did it, yay, it communicates enthusiasm. They're excited. It resonates in their letter of impact. It resonates in their proposal, and it's reflected in the report. So who do you think can go back to the well and say, Alfred Sloan, can you fund me again? People that show I did it, right? Here's another example, because I want to be able to share with you that it's not just research. This is just funding workshops. We're going to fund workshops. It's going to address a main problem. It's going to have $50,000 worth of funding. We're going to have a concrete work plan, right? So when you're applying to these sponsors, you want to see what do they fund? NSF funds conferences, research, programs, centers, right? Alfred Sloan, activities, capacity building, research itself. And then you want to look at those funding levels. If you're doing a research grant, you might get $100,000. But if you're doing a program grant or a workshop, it might be $50,000. I love this slide. So this slide became really great to me during the pandemic because people have said, stay home, stay 6 feet away from people. Did that affect researchers in labs? No, because they still had their lab. They just shut the door. It's fine, I'm doing my research. Zombie apocalypse. So this is a time that I would like to open up for questions. Nope, good. That means that I'm doing something right. So when you're innovating, that means that you have a new process or new methodology, new intervention. Then you want to go through the patents office and demonstrate this is novel, this is important, and we want to be able to get a patent for it. One of the first things that the patent office will do will compare it to all of the other patents and say, is it really novel? Is there anything else already doing this? And they'll also ask, is it obvious? Is it obvious that if you put the light bulb in this way, it's like, okay, everybody knows that. I know there's nothing less common than common sense, but obviousness is one of the patent checks. And what do you want to do now? You want to start writing. Think about, what is my big, bold idea? How would I do it? Why is it important? I'm hoping that you're using your tag to start thinking about your grants. Sometimes you want to start writing your activities. I will be looking at those Mad Libs, but don't let that make you pause in what you're doing in your tag. We have demonstrated prompting questions on purpose. These are designed to help you think through what you want to do and how it would make an impact. So use those blank pages. And there are sections on the research plan that I'd really like you to take advantage of. Your ethos, your pathos, and your logos. Start writing and keep writing. I'll see you Friday. And we have some links to other resources. When we have resources in the syllabus, as far as invited speakers and links to journal articles, the reason why none of this is required is because you should really only be focusing on those resources that resonate with your research. So if you're an NIHer and you see resources in here that are for NIH, how to write an NIH grant, then you'll want to go to the NIH ones. If you're a DARPA scientist, then that keynote from last year should definitely, there's two of them actually. One is from biology and the other one is from our program officer that speaks to how we budget, how we make decisions. So look at those that apply to your research and, well, write to me when you have problems or questions or concerns. Okay. And one of the things that I want to make sure to tell all of our faculty is to have a thick skin. No, it's very rare that you get funded. Everything you submit gets funded. I used to say no one ever does that, but I did a call out to previous participants of our summer grant writing workshops, and then I had a respondent that said, I took your workshops, it was great. I applied for 4 things, I got all 4 awarded. I don't think I've ever heard that before, but it was great news. This is a great time for you to advance your ideas. And it's important that you start writing and sharing and talking about your research. If you are in a room, whether that's Illinois State or George Mason or any of the universities that we have online, if you're in a room with other faculty and scholars, research administrators and students, take this time to learn about each other's research, talk about how you would pitch your project and get feedback. Any volunteers to go first, or do you want to wait till Friday? This has been helpful. I'm so glad. Okay, well then, start writing. Have a great rest of your week. Thank you very much for tuning in.